Welcome back to All That Jam, where music has no limits. We're joined today by Jake Szufnarowski, who has a new band called TRÜKKEN. How we doing, Jake?
I'm fantastic, man. What a guest I am on this podcast for something talking about how music has no limits, because we're basically trying to, with this new band, we're stretching the boundaries of good taste limits in rock and roll, I would say.
There you go. Yes. So I heard, I guess when you originally announced, you had a little clip of Casey Jones as part of it. Yesterday or the 2 days ago, you on Instagram put up the history of the band or the origin story with the video A Touch of Grey. Why don't you give me the oral origin story instead of the musical one?
Well, the origin story is that years ago I started a heavy metal tribute to the Bee Gees, and I stayed in it for 5 years. It was called Tragedy, and after 5 years, I sort of got bored of it, just doing the same thing over and over. So I quit, and that band continued on, and for a long time after that, it was really Peter Shapiro who kept bothering me to start a new band, because he would say, like, "You were so great in Tragedy. Now you're not in a band. We need another band of yours at the Brooklyn Bowl." So I started a hardcore band, and that did not go well at the Brooklyn Bowl. Not that we never even tried it, but they don't book hardcore bands there.
Right.
And Peter just kept saying, "You should start another band that's just like Tragedy." And I was like, there's not going to be another band just like Tragedy. And then some friends and I in October were talking about who's going to be the second band to play at the Sphere, because U2 had announced their whole residency and it was getting started there. And I was like, it's got to be Dead & Co, bro. It's got to be Dead & Co and Fish, solely because they have great relationships with James Dolan, the owner of Madison Square Garden and the owner of the Sphere. So I was like, it's got to be one of those two. And I said, it's also got to be bands that don't mind not being looked at, right? Because the whole idea of the Sphere is you're watching a TV set. So or a big video screen. Everybody was talking about, it's going to be Beyonce, it's going to be Harry Styles, and both of those acts, I was like, they want the focus to be on them. And I was like, the Dead never cared about the focus being on them. And so I said that to my friend, and then he just looked at me and said, "I'm surprised you never started a heavy metal tribute to the Grateful Dead." And I just got this look in my eye, and he went, "No." So I went and I called Phil and Rob. Phil was a guitar player and singer in Tragedy, and Rob was the drummer in Tragedy and a couple other bands of mine. And I called them both, and I was like, "Guys, I got an idea. We're starting a new band. It's going to be a heavy metal tribute to the Grateful Dead." And they were both like, "Word, we're in 100%. Then I called Peter Shapiro, and I was like, "Hey, I started a new band. It's a heavy metal tribute to the Grateful Dead, and we want to make our debut at the Brooklyn Bowl on a Saturday night, and I want $10,000. And he was like, "You're completely out of your fucking mind. You can't have a Saturday night, and you can't have $10,000. And we settled on a Thursday night for quite a lot less than 10 grand. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And we had our first gig booked before we even had a rhythm section or a bass player and a second guitar player, really. And we had never had a rehearsal. But thankfully, Peter trusted me enough and knew that I was, or assumed, I guess, that I would execute at a high level. And I kind of think we have. I mean, people can be the judge of that themselves based on the audio clips that we put out. We're going to have some full-length songs debuting after Memorial Day that'll be on streaming services and stuff before our first gig, which is Thursday, June 20th at the Bowl. But it took a lot longer than expected. And originally today, May 16th, as we're recording this, was supposed to be our first gig. And we were supposed to be playing the Bowl tonight. But back in February or March, I had to call them and say, "Guys, this is taking a lot longer than I thought," because very interesting assignment to sort of rearrange Grateful Dead songs. The Bee Gees stuff was a lot easier. A lot of that stuff was pretty simple chord structures and melodies. So
blues songs,
it all just sort of came to us as a unit. Especially Phil in the band, who's in this band with me now, is sort of a genius at arranging. But yeah, that kind of all that stuff came together really fast. But these songs took a long time for us to figure out how to make these songs work as heavy metal songs.
right.
Some of them are full on fucking heavy metal, and some are just like hard rock. Some are a little punky. But the idea is that like we're performing them all with a lot of attitude and edge, but trying to keep as much of the melodic elements as possible.
Right. So what
we've really been working so that people can dance and sway and spin to this.
We sway at this point. We're older. Oh, we sway at this point. We're older.
Yeah.
So what went into song choices? Like, did you have a list? Did you guys all get together, or did you have a vision when you got it? The first vision, did you say, I knew these songs have to be there?
I put together a playlist of like 25 songs and sent it to everybody. And I'm probably the most not even probably, I'm definitely the most well-versed member of the band in the Grateful Dead catalog. I saw the Dead with Jerry 4 times when I was in high school. And then I worked at the venue Wetlands from 94 to 2001. And I worked there almost every night for those 7 years. Literally like 4 or 5 nights a week minimum I would spend there. And I was there most Tuesday nights for our Dead Center nights, which are Grateful Dead cover bands. So I learned a lot more about the Dead there than I did by seeing them the 4 times I saw them. But I put together a list of like 25 songs, and I was like, these are mostly the popular songs. They're the more accessible ones. And I said, I threw in some kind of left field stuff out there for you all. But what happened was all my bandmates went and they did their own deep dives. They took the playlists I sent them, and I put super obvious things in there that we're not going to be playing on our first gig. Like, I don't want to give too much away, but like I put in US Blues, One More Saturday Night, I Need a Miracle, songs that I thought would just be simple to translate. And when we started our first rehearsals at the end of October, everyone had different ideas and everyone came with some demos. And I was like, wow, most of what you guys are talking about here were not on the original list. And I kind of like that a lot because everybody sort of went and did their own dive and came up with their own ideas that they thought would be cool. And really none of the songs were chosen on how popular they are, except for Casey Jones and TRüKKEN were the 2 that we knew we had to play, because Casey Jones obviously sings about cocaine, and cocaine and metal have a long history together. And TRüKKEN, we had to play the song that we named ourselves after.
Right. So with metal, you don't tend to think of long improvisation. I mean, if a song's long, like Metallica and Justice for All, it's just written long. That's what the song is. It's 12 minutes long. How are you approaching the improvisational element of the Grateful Dead with what this is going to be?
We've got 2 songs in the set right now. We're going to play a 9-song set at the Brooklyn Bowl. It's going to come in at about an hour for our first gig, and we're paired up with a Tool tribute band. Because one of the things I had a really hard time with was like, who do we book ourselves with? Like when I started that Bee Gees band, it was so easy. Everyone knew the Bee Gees hits, so you could play those songs in like a revved up rock and roll form in front of kind of any crowd, and that's what we did. Like our first gig was opening for a ska band called the Aquabats. Our second gig was opening for a Neil Diamond tribute at Irving Plaza. Our third gig was opening for Humphreys McGee at the Nokia Theater in Times Square. And like, so those songs kind of worked with everybody. But I was like, who's another band we can play with whose fans would kind of even understand what we're doing? And I didn't want to book ourselves with a straight metal band. I didn't want to book ourselves with a straight jam band. And then I went to see Tool in January at Madison Square Garden. And like before the show even started, I looked around and I was like, oh, right. Tool is about the jammiest and hippiest of all the metal bands, but even they don't do improv. So the sort of long-winded answer to your question is like 2 of the songs we're doing have a fair bit of improv and jamming in them, but there's one song in the set that's 8.5 minutes long, and it's composed that way, and it has a lot of different parts. And a friend of mine who's a very big Dead fan, I played him our version of it from a rehearsal a few weeks ago, and he was like, after the first verse and chorus, I was like, oh, I get it. And then you changed the riff, and then you changed it again, and then you kept adding more elements. And he's like, 8 minutes later, it never got boring. Right. It's like you weren't jamming, but you were doing different things to the music. And I think that's sort of more what we're going to end up going for. We're not trying to noodle, obviously. Right. That really wouldn't work with the style of music we're playing. It would just probably fall apart very quickly. But I would assume that as we get more in tune with each other and spend more time rehearsing and playing gigs, I wouldn't be surprised to see that we'll start to improvise more. But we're not going to do it because we think we should. We'll do it if we're feeling it. But yeah, it's hard to. it's hard. I want to come across as humble, but holy shit, man, we're getting fucking good. Like last night at rehearsal was the first time we ran the entire set front to back, and we were like, oh, we have a real show, because we probably done 24, 25 rehearsals at this point. And all of those rehearsals were mostly, how are we going to tackle this song? Okay, well, this bridge doesn't work the way we were doing it. So all those rehearsals were focused on one or two songs. And last night I was like, hey, let's come up. We had a 4-hour rehearsal. And after about an hour of working on one of the last songs, I said, let's try to put the set together in order, and let's see how long it is. And we put it together. And at the end, we just played it front to back as if we were at the show. If we made a mistake, which obviously we never have made a mistake. But if we did, we just went right through it and didn't stop to talk.
Right.
About it. At the end, we were all like, okay, this feels good. Like, we're ready. Like, we're ready to be ready. You know, we also had a good laugh that like today was supposed to be our first gig, and like we would have made it happen, but it would have been a lot more pressure and stress. So it feels good to still, we're probably going to have about 8 more rehearsals at this point before our gig, which is in 5 weeks.
Nice.
So very serious thing. But it's also, there's a lot of humor involved too. And if you've seen those videos, you can probably understand. Like, we're doing it tongue in cheek, but we want everybody to laugh with us. We're not laughing at dead fans, obviously.
Right.
And I don't think people are going to laugh at us. I think a lot of people are going to be like, that's not for me. And yeah, that's fine. Like, that's the beauty of art and music, is that it's subjective, right?
Right. Right. One of my first thoughts when you had mentioned bands playing at the Sphere before was Tool.
Yeah.
Would be fantastic, but it would scare the hell out of people. You would probably have people like scratching their eyes out with the visuals in that place.
Maybe, man. I watched the first and the last night of those Fish streams, and some of that shit was fucking scary too, you know. And if you're not ready for it, their music can be one of the scariest things to listen to in the world. About, you know, how terrible some of it is, you know, like before they get to the jams, Fish is, woo, it can be a difficult process to get through some of those songs.
Right. My other first thought was Iron Maiden.
Yeah. I think they could probably put on an incredible show there, because they've always had such a crazy visual element. Yet Bruce Dickinson is a guy who needs to be seen, right? And runs across the stage, really works it. And then Yannick Gers, their third guitar player, who's basically a stunt guitar player, throwing his guitar in the air all the time and doing high kicks with his tight black jeans and his Reeboks. I mean, I think Iron Maiden and TRüKKEN should probably do a run together at the Sphere.
There you go.
Yeah. Now we're talking. Bruce, give me a call.
So let's go back to, you had mentioned the Wetlands. You worked there. You were a talent buyer there. And obviously it was the mecca of jam bands. Probably the whole idea of a jam band culture started with Nightingales and the Wetlands and the whole New York scene at that period. You want to talk a little bit about working there, and maybe related to, you're a metal guy. How does a metal guy end up at the Wetlands?
Literally just by mistake. I moved to New York City in 1994 from Lowell, Massachusetts. I moved from Lowell to Los Angeles, and I realized quickly that wasn't for me. And then I moved to New York, and I had heard about the Wetlands, but I had never been there. And I would open the Village Voice and look at the listings of all the clubs, and then look for jobs. And I was trying to get a job at a record label, and I saw an ad for music venue looking for an assistant to the owner, and it said environmental music venue, or environmentally conscious music venue looking for an assistant to the owner, and it listed a fax number. And I was like, well, that could only be Wetlands, right? I've never even heard of an environmentally conscious music venue before, but I didn't even know Wetlands had an environmental angle to it when I had heard about it, because friends in Massachusetts would be like, dude, there's this band called Blues Traveler, this band called Spin Doctors, and we'd listen to some tapes from the Wetlands, and I'd be like, wow, that place must be magical. So I like put on a collared shirt and tucked it into a pair of pants and walked down there with my resume to 161 Hudson Street, and I rang the buzzer, And this voice answered. It turned out to be Larry Block, who started Wetlands before he sold it to Peter Shapiro in 97. But he answered the buzzer and he was like, "Who is it?" And I said, I'm here to drop off a resume." And he said, "We're not taking personal appearances. Go, the fax number was in the ad." So I was dejected and I went to Kinko's and I sent a fax and I wrote a cover letter saying I was the guy who came down in person. And then I got a call like an hour later and it was Larry again. And he was like, "You want to come in for an interview tomorrow?" And I was like, "Yeah." And when I came in for the interview, the first thing was I came through the side door. And if you've ever been to Wetlands, you'd go in, there was a side door near the Volkswagen van. Mm-hmm. And then I looked around a little. He told me to come to the basement through the intercom. And I looked around a little and I saw a stage. And I was like, well, that can't be the stage where Blues Traveler and the Spin Doctors play. So the big stage must be in the basement. So I went down the stairs. And I was like, I saw the inner sanctum, which was what we called the lounge in the basement there. And I was like, well, this definitely isn't it. Maybe there must be like a third floor that I didn't see. And I went into the office and we had an interview. And Larry was like, "When's Jerry Garcia's birthday?" That was one of the first questions he asked me. I was like, "Dude, how the fuck should I know?" And he was like, "What, you don't like the Grateful Dead?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like the Grateful Dead." He said, "How many times have you seen them?" And I said, 4 times. And he's like, "What else do you like?" And I just started listing like metal and punk and some other jam bands and hip hop groups. And I was like, "I like all sorts of music." And he's like, "But you don't know when Jerry Garcia's birthday is." And I said to him, "When's Tony Iommi's birthday?" And he's like, "Well, how the fuck should I know that?" And I was like, "What, you don't like Black Sabbath? One of the hippiest fucking metal bands of all time." And he was like, "Yeah, you're hired, brother." And I worked very closely with Larry for a bunch of years. And that, I got to say, like, Wetlands is really where I learned about jam bands. Other than I went to a lot of punk shows as a kid and hip hop shows, didn't go to any jam shows. I did see Percy Hill in 1993 at a friend's school, like a spring fling type of thing. Mm-hmm. I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And I had seen Max Creek at one point. Like, my sister dragged me. She was supposed to be babysitting me, and she dragged me to a Max Creek show at University of Lowell. I did not like them. I gotta say, I came to like them a lot more later. So I'm not dissing them, but I didn't like them when I was 14. I was like, "What the fuck is this? Man, you guys just, these are long guitar solos, but they're not the kind of guitar solos I like." But yeah, working at Wetlands is where I got introduced to, like Fish, Blues Traveler, Dave Matthews Band, Spin Doctors had all sort of stopped playing there by 94. But I was seeing Mo and the Ominous Sea Pods and early Disco Biscuit shows. And then I really, really got into it. Like, first band I ever flew across the country to see was Mo at Great American Music Hall. And
oh, nice.
And then I was bit with that bug. Right. But Wetlands also booked metal shows. We booked punk and hardcore shows every Sunday. We booked some incredible metal shows. I booked a Manowar there. I booked At the Gates. I booked Vader. Like, all Rage Against the Machine played there. That's not a metal band, but like, it had a very diverse schedule, which is what really made me fall in love with it. But I did notice that, like, boundaries were never crossed. Like, if it was a jam band night, it was all jam bands playing. And it was almost always jam bands on Saturday nights, because Larry Block would call those psychedelic Saturdays. But Sundays, we sort of had free reign to book all the punk and hardcore matinees that we wanted, and then different metal shows throughout the week.
Right. I always loved the old Bill Graham and other ballroom posters from back in the old days, because you would get Miles Davis opening for the Grateful Dead, or, somebody, just things, John McLaughlin opening for Chubby Checker or something.
Yeah,
and it was great.
This never happens anymore. Even on big festivals, other than, I'd say, like Jazz Fest, even festivals are sort of grouped. Like, there'll be a day that leans one way and a day that leans another way. But yeah, promoters and talent buyers and festival programmers they're not as adventurous as they used to be. And I would try to do things like that at Wetlands when I was booking, and I would try to put different bands of different genres together, and the fans would just not get into it. So I learned pretty quickly, you just can't do that. But Bill Graham also was booking in a different time, where I read in a biography of him that bands would oftentimes be dissatisfied with their payouts at the end of the night. And he would say to them, apparently, I read this in a lot of places, where he would say, "Do you see the name on the marquee? It says Bill Graham's Fillmore East, and then it says the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers." people aren't paying to come to see the fucking Grateful Dead. And it was kind of true at that point because there were so few places putting on original music that people just went to the Fillmore, and Bill Graham had the luxury of like, this place is going to be jam packed no matter who's playing. So I can program shit that I think is cool. And that really did a great service, I think, to the history of rock and roll and people coming of age in the late 60s and 70s who got turned on all this stuff that they never would have. Like no one was going to go see Miles Davis at the fucking Village Gate. No one who is going to see Vanilla Fudge and Led Zeppelin at the Fillmore East, you know? So that was probably a magical time to go to shows. And I can't remember the last time I've been blown away by an opening act who was wholly different from the headliner that I was going to see. I've been blown away by a lot of opening acts, but they're usually in the same vein, at least the same lane, you know?
Right, exactly. So after the Wetlands closed up, I guess you continued for a while to work with Peter.
Yeah, Peter and I became very good friends during his time at the Wetlands, and I was just on the phone with him yesterday, and he reminded me, he's like, we were both birthed by Larry Block into the music business, and he taught us both a lot of valuable lessons, and Peter would tell you this if you talk to him, himself, and that I was sort of the bridge between Larry and Peter because I worked so closely with Larry, and then Larry moved up to Vermont because he wanted to spend more time with his son who was living in New Hampshire, and he looked for someone to sell the club to, and he ended up selling it to Peter, not because Peter offered him the most money, but because Peter was the only guy who agreed to keep all the environmental principles in practice, which was providing a space to hold weekly meetings and that organized demonstrations and had speakers talking about environmental issues. And he only recycled. Every paper product was recycled, every napkin, even the matchsticks. He used glassware instead of plastic, which was a pain in the ass because you had to wash cups all night. But like every little thing done, all the cleaners, cleaning agents and soaps and everything used was all environmentally friendly. And Larry knew that most people would say yes to doing that, but he trusted that Peter would. And then Larry sort of told me I had to be his conscience with Peter, which turned out he didn't need. But Peter would often say to me in his early days there, like, what would Larry do in this situation? And I'd tell him, and Peter would be like, well, that's going to cost 3 times as much money or make things a lot harder. And I'd be like, yeah, but that's what Larry would do. And Peter, to his credit, would be like, well, then that's what we're going to do, you know? And Peter was a special dude. I don't think anybody else could have taken that place over and run it, you know, successfully and made Larry happy about it and kept all the fans happy. Like our customer base, you know, either stayed the same or grew after Peter took over. Like a lot of people were afraid, like, oh, it's just going to be some money grabber guy. But I don't think Peter ever made a nickel. In fact, I know he never made a nickel. He spent more money running that club than he ever took out of it. So it was a money loser for him. But, you know, Peter went on to do his whole thing. I went on to do my thing, which is different. I just stayed as a promoter. I didn't open venues. But Peter and I stayed really close. And when Brooklyn Bowl opened, I had recently started Tragedy. So we started playing there a lot. And then we did 7 tours of the UK in Tragedy. And after I quit the band in 2012, I went back to the UK for a long weekend, 4th of July weekend, and he had opened a Brooklyn Bowl in London. And I went to see, the impetus for going on this trip was like, I wanted to see Black Sabbath playing their last ever London show in Hyde Park. Dolly Parton was playing in Nottingham, and I had never been in Nottingham, and I had seen Dolly Parton, but I wanted to see her again. I loved her. Jack White was playing at the Hammersmith Apollo, and the Bronx were playing at Sonosphere, who are a punk band I love, and then Government Mule was playing at the Brooklyn Bowl. So I was like, talk about a wide array of music. Right. So I went over to England for that week, and then I called Peter from the Brooklyn Bowl, and I was like, dude, this club looks phenomenal. The staff was super nice. Everybody treated me great. The food's fantastic. Government Mule was great. But you don't have a lot of shows on the calendar. What's going on? And he was like, it's been a struggle getting people to understand like what we're doing with a Brooklyn Bowl in England. We need someone who really understands it to be on the ground over here. You want to move to England? And I literally I looked at the guy I was eating dinner with at the bowl, and I was like, how much money would I need to make to live comfortably in London? And he told me, and I doubled it and told Peter that's how much I needed to make. And he was like, well, we can't pay you that much, but we can pay you this. And I just laughed. And I was like, all right, And that was July 1st or 2nd, 2014. And I was living in London full time by September 1st that year, like less than 2 months later. And I lived there for 3 years and booked that room. And we did some cool jam stuff. Phil Esch came over a couple of times and played. But there's just, that scene pretty much doesn't exist in England.
Yeah.
Like,
we talked to Jerry Joseph once, and he was talking about he was going to be doing a tour with Drive-By Truckers over in Europe. It got canceled because of COVID, but he said that the promoters said to him, "Don't mention you're in a jam band." They were like, "People over here don't get what the jam band thing is. Don't mention widespread panic."
Right. They totally don't. Yet I think it's funny that I used to book this band called Osric Tentacles at Wetlands, which were like a instrumental psychedelic British jam band. But then I went over there and I started telling people, like, "You guys like the Osric Tentacles?" Meeting British people, and they look at me like I was crazy. They're like, "What? Who?" If they had heard of them, they hated them. And most of them hadn't heard of them and thought I was making the name up to make fun of them. There's no band called Osric.
1 out of 50 people actually had heard of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man! So you come back to America, and I guess some point after the millennium, after we flipped over to a new millennium, you started a company called Rocks Off, right?
Yes. I started that company and I named it after the first song on the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street album. And yeah, when Wetlands closed, I did a short stint working at the knitting factory as the talent buyer there. And that was the opposite of Wetlands as far as their back office was run. Everything was about dollars and filling out forms to get requests for checks to pay bands and stuff. Whereas like at Wetlands, we were paying people with wet cash that just came off of the bar, like that was a very like bootstraps operation. So I didn't last too long at the knitting factory, but I literally lasted 4 months and I quit. And the owner was like, "You can't quit. Like, we're making so much more money with you than we did
The last guy."
Yeah, when we were booking all these jazz bands. And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I can't work here." And he was like, "Well, why don't you just keep booking a lot of shows here and I'll pay you per show?" And I did that for like 6 months. And then I couldn't get dates there. So I booked a few shows at CBGB's, and then I booked a few things at the Mercury Lounge. And most of it was through contacts I had made while working at Wetlands. And so a lot of it was jam bands. And then I was acting as an independent promoter before I even really fully understood that I was or what that meant. And then finally someone said to me, like, "You need a name like for your company." And I was like, "Why? Like, what's it matter?" And they were like, "Just to put on the flyer, like Bill Graham presents." And I was like, "Oh, Jake Szufnarowski presents. No, that doesn't have a good ring to it." So then I just was like listening to the Stones and I was like, "Oh, Rocks Off. Yeah, that's what I'll call it." And that's what I called it. And so we've been doing shows all over the city and a boat cruise series. And since 2002, really. Wetlands closed September 2001, and I quit the knitting factory on January 2nd, 2002. So I guess that's technically the day I started Rocks Off.
All right. So it's your 23rd season hitting the water. You guys just cruise around the harbor? Is that what the deal is?
Yeah, we do 3-hour cruises. We do bands on boats. We have boats that hold 100 people, 200 people, 400 people, and 600 people. And we do 3-hour cruises that go to the Statue of Liberty and under the Brooklyn Bridge, and people have a great time. I was just kind of thinking recently about how, like, when we started it, cell phones weren't really a thing, and there was no social media, no Instagram, so people would they would come on the boat. One of the draws was that we sort of like tacitly said that, you can get away with smoking on the boats, which meant you could get away with smoking weed, which was a big deal in the early 2000s.
Right.
But then as social media started to develop, I felt like it was great for people to take pictures, but it also gave people a sense of like FOMO. Like, people would look at their phones and be like, "Oh, well, my friends are over here and there." And like, I feel like for a little while there in the early 2010s, people didn't want to be stuck on a boat for 3 hours. And I think the tide has turned coming out of the pandemic, where people are like, we love being like out of range of everything, like we're all in this together now. Nobody's coming in, nobody's showing up late, nobody's leaving early. Like, we're all just here, and it gives people the chance to sort of forget about the outside world for a while, which is, I think, pretty cool. And I
Yeah.
would be down to like put people's phones in yonder pouches, except for the fact that a big selling point is getting pictures of the skyline and the Statue of Liberty. But I really like the idea of like just being literally out there on the water, like we're our own island, so to speak.
Right.
We're all just stuck there, and it, you know, it makes people want to talk to other people more, which I notice that's something people don't do a lot at shows nowadays. People go to shows with the people they're with, and between bands, people look at their phones and they're just very like compartmentalized, like sort of have blinders on for their own experience. But out on the boats, people just start talking to each other and oh, you know, hey, can you take a picture of me and my friend in front of the Statue of Liberty? And then, oh yeah, oh, it's you know, oh, you like this band, and it's a really cool vibe out there.
Yeah, I worked on a paddle boat for a summer once. I was a maid on a paddle boat that had, bachelorette parties, that kind of thing. But sometimes they'd have bands. We'd have a band play. We actually got George Porter play once, which was pretty cool.
Oh, sick! I've done George and the Running Partners, and I did what was it? I did the Funky. What's it? The Funky Meters.
Funky Meters.
Yeah, in 2017. I think it was 2017, the year I moved back from London, and it turned out to be Art Neville's last appearance in New York. But man, the Meters are great. New Orleans is great. We've done tons of New Orleans music over the years. They talk about a paddle boat culture. The boat company does a lot of bachelorette parties and things like that too. That, you know, we usually keep them separate, but every now and then I'll get a call from the boat owner being like, "Hey man, like how many tickets do you have sold for this event?" And I'll be like, I'll tell him. And he'll be like, "Do you expect it to sell out?" And I'll say no. And he'll be like, "I got a group of 50 people for a birthday party or a bachelorette or a bachelor party. Like, can we squeeze them in if they pay for tickets?" And I always say yes. And sometimes it's such a weird mix of crowds, because sometimes it'll be a crazy metal band or it'll be a jam band. And it'll be some person's like, 25th birthday or something. I don't know what they're going to be like. And they show up and they're very different demographically, shall we say, whether it's different ages, different races, but same thing though. People are usually like, "Oh, wow, I'm at a rock and roll concert." Or
I'm stuck on right. There's something to be said for being stuck on the boat though. For you can either have a crappy time or you just embrace it and you're like, "What? I'm out on a boat. What am I going to do?"
I think people who I think it sort of keeps people away that aren't gonna have a good time. Like very few people, I almost never see people not having a good time in the boats, unless they drank too much too fast, in which case they pass out and we sort of put them in a corner, get them some water, make sure their friends are looking after them.
Prop them up.
Yeah. We've had to bring the boat back a couple of times to get rid of people who had ingested too much of one thing or another.
Right.
But we've never thrown anybody overboard yet. But I mean, I've thought about it, and maybe one time before I stop doing them, I'll give it a try. Just I like different experiences. Yeah, just to tick that box.
Right, 3 hours is probably my limit on a boat. I went on a cruise once that the Radiators out of New Orleans played, and it was 6 days, and I was just like, "What am I doing?" Unless the band was playing, I was like ready to jump over myself.
Right. I went on one for 3 nights once that left out of California that the Flaming Lips were playing on. And the organizers had offered me free tickets to include it in an emailer blast that we were doing because their sales were so bad. And I was like, yeah, for a free cruise, a 3-night cruise. And I was like, never again, no matter under any situation will I do that. It was just too much.
Right. All right, let's take us back to music a little bit here. You were in a band with Karina Reichman and the drummer from TRüKKEN at one time that is not a jam band, correct?
I was. Yes. So to probably surprise a lot of people to know that Karina played in a band that wasn't a jam band. Though I noticed as she's becoming more successful, she's owning her past a little more and posting pictures of her old metal bands. Karina and I met because she was playing in a band called Sound of Urchin. And they played one of our boat shows. This would have been 2012, I think. It was our summer between high school and NYU. And after the show, she was like, "Hey, I hear you're the guy that runs Rocks Off." And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And she said, "I want to be your intern." And I was like, "We don't have interns." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because they're just a pain in the ass and they're usually retarded and I don't have time to fucking teach them. And it's more work than it's worth for me at this point." And she's like, "I can promise you I'm not retarded." And I was like, "All right, you start Monday then. Like, here's the address. Show up Monday, 11 o'clock. And she was like, "Okay." I don't even think we traded phone numbers. And Monday at like 10:58 a.m., there she was at my office. And I was like, okay, you made it. And one day turned into 2, turned into 3. And then she interned her whole freshman year of NYU, her whole first semester. And then I liked her a lot and she liked working with us a lot. And then we had her intern the second semester too. And her advisor was like, you can't intern for the same company 2 semesters in a row. You need different type of experience. And at that point I had started a rock and roll themed film festival that was going to be that year in May. And so I was like, all right, tell your advisor that you're interning for a film festival, not a concert promoter. And she was like, okay. And that's what happened. And then after her freshman year, I hired her full time, and she worked with us for 7.5 years. And when I moved to London to take the Brooklyn Bowl job, she became general manager of Rocksoft. So she was very integral to the success of my business for a long time. And I started a band in 2014. I left Tragedy in 2012. And then literally one day, Karina and I were driving around doing something in the city, and I pointed out a couple things. One of the things I used to do as well was I used to do walking tours of the history of rock and roll in New York City. And so I have a penchant for pointing out, that used to be that venue, or Talking Heads used to have a rehearsal studio in that building, because everything I've ever read about the history of music, especially in New York City, I've made notes, mental notes, or written them down. So wherever I go in the city, I sort of know, oh yeah, this historical piece. And I just kept saying like, yeah, now this place is a bank. This place is a fucking condo for rich people to just park their money. And she was like, I'm surprised you haven't started a band that talks about those types of things. And I was like, I think I'm actually about to, Karina. I think I'm going to start a hardcore band, because that's the kind of music, like, I'm angry about the sort of wealth and income gap in New York City and the gentrification of the city that's really my home. And I was like, do you want to play in the band? And she was like, yeah. And she was playing in a band called Shitkill at the time, which was a metal band. And she was like, I bet Josh from Shitkill would be a great guitar player for this. And I was like, I bet Rob would be a great drummer. And then we recorded a 6-song EP and played probably a dozen gigs. And then I moved to London, and the band just kind of fell apart. But yeah, Karina was an exceptional hardcore and metal bass player. And, you probably, if you've seen her perform, anyone who's seen her perform, like, she shreds and rocks hard. And when she played in Marco's band, she'd have a fuzz box on her bass and like take long fuzzed out metal kind of solos. So yeah, she was a trip to be in a band with and to work with. And to this day, we're very good friends, and I treasure her dearly as a presence in my life. And I'm going to see her Saturday night at the Racket, the former Highline Ballroom, which she sold out in one day when it went on sale 3 months ago.
Nice. Yeah, she's fantastic.
Karina.
I've seen her a few times. One time she did Psycho Killer, and I was like, that's so perfect for her. Tina Weymouth, bass player. I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, so let me take you back even further. You used to hang out with something called the Rodney Speed Experience. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
The greatest bands of all time. So Rodney was one of the only employees at Wetlands to work there. Basically, he didn't work there from the day it opened, but like 2 weeks after it opened, he got a job there. Rodney was, in many ways, I considered him my brother, but he was also kind of like my son, in that Rodney was maybe 15 years older than me, 13 years older than me, but loved rock and roll like no one I'd ever met before, and had this knowledge about the history of rock and roll that was incomparable. Like, you would say to him, Rodney, what was the track listing of the Beatles' third album? And he'd be like, well, third album to come out in the UK or third album to come out in the US? And he'd be like, I don't know, third album in the US. Well, the third album in the US was actually the second album that put out in the UK, and the track listing on the UK pressing was this and that, and like just knew all of that. And he worked at Wetlands as a barback, but eventually he had to be moved to the janitor, because he would just stop doing his job at night. Like, if a band was playing something he liked, he would just stop and he would boogie to the band all night. And then we'd be running out of glasses, and someone would go looking for him, and they'd be like, where's Rodney? Oh, he's over there dancing to the band. And half the time he'd be dancing to the band, and honestly, sometimes he'd have headphones in under his dreadlocks. and you'd tap him on the shoulder and he'd like turn around and take his earbuds out because we're like, what are you doing? There would be a band playing at full volume and he'd be like, I'm listening to Eric Burden and the Animals. What? But he just loved music so much. So we moved him to be the janitor, and he was great at that because he would just work in the day and then he would hang out all night and just either listen to music in his headphones or watch the band, depending who it was. Rodney loved Ozric Tentacles too. And Rodney was about 5'3", a bit heavy, and a black man, and just full of charisma when he wanted to exude it. A lot of times he just have his head down, and he had some sort of autism that never got diagnosed, but it was obvious to anybody who talked to him. But on our very last night that we were ever in Wetlands, that venue was supposed to close on September 15th, 2001, but it ended up closing September 11th. September 10th was its last night because of what happened in New York on September 11th. And we didn't get to do our whole big farewell thing. But then a few weeks later, when people could get into that neighborhood, Peter made some deal with the landlord to like, hey, let us have one more night where we can be open to the public so people can come in and just celebrate. And Peter had gotten Robert Hunter happened to be in town, and Peter got Robert Hunter to come down, and he played like an acoustic set for everybody. And it was just like really more like friends and family night. And we invited people we knew had been coming to the club for a long time, but we didn't really publicize it. So it was just a few hundred people. Robert Hunter played, and I think so. I don't really recall. I think some other people played like some acoustic sets or something, and we just played DJ music and drank the rest of the liquor that was left over.
Right.
Basically, that was the idea of the night. And at the end of the night, there were maybe a couple dozen of us in the club, and Rodney got on stage and was singing along to everything that the DJ was playing from the DJ booth. And he was singing into a microphone as if there were thousands of people out in the crowd. The microphone wasn't even plugged in, but I was just like, that guy needs a band. And Rodney had sat in with a band called Rana once, and I had sort of played a trick on everybody once because I knew Rodney could sing and wanted to perform. And we used to do this thing called the Power Jam. And one year we did Power Jam. The idea of that was we would book a ton of musicians. So we'd have guys from Mo and the Disco Biscuits and Government Mule and Uncle Sammy and Ulu and Fat Mama and whoever was around. And we'd rent a bunch of backline. And then we wouldn't tell anyone who the bands would be. And then people would show up around 6 o'clock, all the musicians, and we'd group them. I'd be like, hey, why don't you guys can be a band, and then you 6 guys can be a band and play whatever you feel like. Just talk about it on stage. You can jam, you can improvise. But I put out this, like, I think Fish was in town and had a night off, or whatever the situation was. I made it feel like in our marketing that Trey was going to be a special guest at the stroke of midnight. So the band came out, and then Rodney came out in like a cloak with a hood and walked onto the stage and like flipped his hood back, and everyone in the crowd was like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, this is no one we've ever heard of. But then he led that band. It was Al and Chuck from Mo. I remember they were on guitar. And I remember specifically it was those two because they tried to play Smoke on the Water, and they started playing it. They played War Pigs, and then they played Smoke on the Water. And they got a few measures in, and Rodney just stopped the band and looked at Al from Mo and was like, dude, it's in G. This song is in G. And Al looked at him like, what? And Rodney pointed at the frets on his guitar while he went dun, 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 dun. And then Al played it in the right key. And then the band gelled again. And Rodney was like, that's what I'm talking about. And that video is on YouTube. If you type Rodney Speed against Smoke on the Water, it's hilarious that he schools these professional musicians. So then between that and then the last night of the club, I was like, this guy needs a band. And because I had just taken over booking at the Knitting Factory and 9/11 had happened, like we had tons of empty dates because bands canceled their tour dates. So I was like, hey, we're going to do something called the Rodney Speed Experience on some random Wednesday night 2 weeks from now. Rodney, I want you to sing for this band. And he was like, okay, yeah, I don't care. Who's going to be in my band? And I was like, yeah, good question. So I hit up, it was Joe Russo on drums, Scott Metzger on guitar, and a guy named Backyard Bill Stites, who was just a kind of a friend of mine. I think he worked security at Wetlands for a little bit, but was a really good musician. He had auditioned for the Disco Biscuits when they needed a bass player. But I was like, how about you three guys? And at this point, you got to remember, like, Scott Metzger and Joe Russo had like zero profile. They were just guys who played in bands at Wetlands and I had become friends with. And Scott was my roommate, and I loved Joe to death. And I gave Joe the nickname Sergio Russo and used to put it in every Wetlands ad to the point where he was embarrassed. He'd be like, "Would you stop putting that in there?" I'm like, "We gotta make a name for you." So whatever band Joe might have been playing a gig in, like as a sub drummer, I'd put in the ad, like, I remember Ron Levy's Wild Kingdom featuring Sergio Russo on drums. And I remember that gig because Ron Levy showed up, who was a jazz guy, B3 player, and got mad when he saw the poster that said featuring Sergio Russo. And Joe was like, "I had nothing to do with it." And I had to explain to him, "Well, Ron, people in New York City love Joe, and they haven't all heard of you. So I was just trying to sell tickets." Yeah, Joe and Scott and Backyard Bill were Rodney's backing band for a while. And then someone couldn't do a gig. I think it might have been Scott at first. And I got another guitar player. And then the gig after that, I just started booking them to open for other bands. And then, so I think Scott couldn't play guitar one night, so I got another guitar player. And then the next gig, Scott was like, "Oh, I can play this one." And I was like, "Well, this other guy wants to play too." So we just kept adding guitar players to the band. And by like the fourth or fifth gig, I was like, "Fuck it, I'm going to play guitar too. Why not? Like, I love Rodney. I want to be on stage with him." And that's sort of like, I had played in bands in high school, but had given that up when I moved to the city because I wanted to get into the business side, because I'm not a particularly good musician. I'm tenacious and I try hard. And I'm good at rallying everybody. And that's sort of what I do, what I've done in my other bands. And, I can kind of sing, but I guess I'm fearless. That's how you would put it. Like, I can kind of sing, but I can pull it off because I'm fearless. And so I just kind of joined Rodney's band. And then some nights we would, I think at our peak, we had 9 different guitar players because people would just, they'd be like, more and more people caught wind of what was going on. And Backyard Bill Stites at one point, who was the only constant member of that band. He played bass in every gig we played, but Backyard Bill once described the crowds we would play for as, was it always unsuspecting, but never unappreciative, because no one would know what would hit them. And we would always open those shows with, I wrote an original song called, I think it was just called Rodney Speed. It was like, "Who's the man we celebrate? Rockin' Rodney Speed." So we did this intro song as if he was James Brown, and then I'd introduce him to the stage, and he'd come out, and we'd play Born to Be Wild. That would start every gig, and then we'd play a bunch of covers. And the people in the crowd are always like, "I never heard of this band. I don't understand what's going on. Who is this short little black dude on stage with all these white dudes?" And I got us all matching outfits. We used to wear like red and white tracksuits with Rodney's face on them that I had screen printed on them. And yeah, that was a phenomenal band. And Rodney passed away in 2016 suddenly of a heart attack, which was heartbreaking. And that in of it, just an aside, is that he passed away, I think it was January 12th or January 13th of 2013. And I was in the middle of trying to run 3 miles every day in January. And then I ended up extending that. And I ran 3 miles every single day in 2016 and made videos of myself running and called it Running for Rodney. And I raised a bunch of money and we started a scholarship in Rodney's name at Berklee College of Music.
Nice.
There's a dorm room named after him there too. That was part of the scholarship deal and donating all this money. They had built a new dorm and they named a room after him. And I went to see it once. And the room next to him is the Quincy Jones dorm room. Down the hall is the John Mayer dorm room. And I just love the idea that like there's these students at Berklee College of Music that are like, they go to their dorm and they're like, "Oh, there's a plaque. This is the Rodney Speed room." And they Google it. And I'm sure they're just very, very confused, but I love it.
It's crazy. That's so crazy. And apparently you guys opened up for, Butthole Surfers, the Tubes, a lot of very interesting names there, huh?
Yeah. And it started with me just having the band open for band shows that I booked. And then it just turned into like a bunch of venue owners and promoters in New York knew that this was a thing that I was doing and knew how much I loved Rodney. And really, like, the whole idea of Rodney's Speed Experience was in service to him. Like, he was such an odd dude in that he would never talk about himself, wouldn't talk about much, and like had a hard time connecting with people. But once he got on the stage, it was like he had practiced for those moments for his entire life. He would just come alive and he would use all these tricks. He would announce the band members to the crowd and he would be like, "Ladies and gentlemen, over here on your left, that would be my right," on guitar. But then he would know how to introduce everyone, but would forget their names. And tons of times he would turn to me and be like, he would turn to me but forget to like put his hand over the mic, and he'd build someone up over here playing this beautiful Thunderbird bass. Jake, what's his name? And then I'd have to be like, dude, that's Backyard Bill. Oh, right, that on a bass, it's Backyard Bill. And so fans started, like, other promoters started booking us on cool shows as openers. It was almost always like at the last minute, I think, where there wouldn't be an opener booked and the tour manager would advance the show and be like, oh, we want an opening band. We're the kind of band who would like someone to go on stage an hour before us and warm up the crowd. We would get those calls and we would just show up and we'd just fucking give it to them. And we would walk out there and the crowds would just stare at us for the first song or two. And then they'd realize what was going on and that it was something special. And they'd really get behind it. And I mean, that's probably my most fun band.
Very nice, very nice. So we got the TRüKKEN. What's the date that the Brooklyn Bowl, and do we have any other dates for TRüKKEN?
We'll be playing Thursday, June 20th at the Brooklyn Bowl in Williamsburg, New York. That's the only date we have right now. We've been offered some other gigs, and I just kind of told everybody to just hold off, like other promoters. It's really nice to be offered gigs. It's very cool, but we're also like, we want to make sure we play one gig and play this gig very right. And we really want to make sure we do justice to these tunes. Like with the Bee Gees band, it was just such a goof. We never thought it would go anywhere. And it ended up taking us, like I said, to the UK on 7 tours. We played all over America. I think in the 5 years I was in that band, we played over 300 gigs. And that's something we definitely don't want to do in this band. We just want to play cool gigs that are going to be a lot of fun. If we can get paid, all the better. But really, like, we want to like do the best we can, add songs into this mix, and add the songs in a way that, like, we don't want to just throw things together. So really want to take our time and make sure that we're going to do this right and have a lot of fun with it. Obviously, like the whole idea is to have
in a
fun.
very crowded market of a lot of Grateful Dead cover bands. Hell, they have that whole Skull and Roses things that didn't happen this year, but they had a 3-day festival. You guys have such a unique angle on this, and I'm really interested to see how this is going to play out for you.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see if people are going to like it. Like I sort of have no doubt that we're going to put on a good show. And we're going to do what we think is awesome. We're a tight band. We're a tight unit. We're very well rehearsed. We're all very good performers on the stage. We've got a lot of history of performing. But I literally have no idea if people are going to like this. Like, we're going to play for an hour and, there's a good chance that half the crowd leaves after 40 minutes and goes, this is not the way I want to hear these Grateful Dead songs. Like, I hope that doesn't happen, but we've all sort of talked ourselves into being ready for that to happen. And we might play 2 gigs and people might might not want any more of it. And if that's the case, well, it's cool because I've been having a lot of fun with my friends. And one of the members of the band is someone I'd never even met before we started the band. Like Rob, the drummer, was like, I want to have this woman named Megan in the band. And she played in Led Zeppelin for a lot of years, and then also played in Ghost, which is a big metal band that plays in arenas, and they all wear masks and they sort of dress as like old, like 15th century popes. It's a real weird concept band, but like she's just a monster on the bass, and like I've been having a great time getting to know her and the other guitar player is this guy named Hag, who's played all sorts of weird gigs, plays in a couple of Frank Zappa tribute bands, does a lot of studio session work. Just an incredible shredder guitar player. And like I got like 2 months after I started this band, I woke up one night, like in the middle of the night, I woke up in a cold sweat going, what the fuck am I doing? What if nobody comes to see us? And I finally got myself back to sleep, and I went to therapy the next day, and I said to my therapist, I'm like, what if nobody likes this band? And she was like, yeah, what if nobody likes it? And I was like, I wonder how that's going to make me feel. And I had to think about it for a couple of days. And I thought about quitting the band. And then we went to our next rehearsal. And
You're like,
the next rehearsal, I was just like looking at everybody, and I was like, I don't fucking care if anybody likes this band. Actually, like, I woke up to the fact that I was like the beauty of being in this band and doing this is just creating this music. And then if people and spending all this time in the rehearsal room with these 4 other people who we're really connecting with, and we're all on the same page with our humor, with our love of music, our love of playing music and performing together, that I'm like, Right. It's all about the journey, not the destination, right? And so the Brooklyn Bowl is going to be the first stop on this train, and if it's the last stop, like, okay, I think there's going
Right.
to be a lot of stops, but the idea is like what really made me commit full on to it was like, oh, well, whatever happens, I'm enjoying this process with these four
Right.
other people.
And listening to The Touch of Grey, I'll tell you, when you're listening to it, it takes you a minute to put together that it's Robert Hunter's words and wait, this melody really is Touch of Grey. But I tell you what, once you get through the first verse and the chorus, you accept it. At least for myself, I found that I accepted this, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this works. I can go with this. No, I haven't heard everything you're going to do, but I feel like hopefully you'll get a lot of that. That, you know, it may take people a second in order to conceptualize what you're doing, but I think once you get past, you know, this is way different, then it's good.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, and I'm glad that, like, you obviously like it enough to have invited me on your podcast. So that was a very, that was a very positive sign, to have gotten that message from you. And yeah, other people who have heard it, like, people have still only heard, they've heard about a minute of Casey Jones and about a minute of Touch of Grey. And in a couple of weeks we'll be able to let people hear a lot more.
Right.
But then a lot of it's going to be in the performance, right? In the live performance. And yeah, people are either to like it or they're not. And
Yep.
yeah,
And so, but you're out there doing it. You know, my granddad always told me, whatever anybody else thinks about you is none of your business. So
right. Yeah, that's great advice, but it's also it's
it's
tough
hard.
to it's tough to implement it in your own life. And I remember from my other bands, like, we'd play a show opening for a band, and then I'd go the next day and look at the comments on Facebook, and it's so true that you can read 50 comments about how great you were, and one guy is like, that fucking guy that guy looked fat. And then for the next 6 months, I'm like, holy fuck, I'm fat. Shit.
I gotta go running.
Yeah, it's like all you remember. But with this band, I don't know. It just feels so much lighter. I think because I've been through this process before of taking music that people cared about. Not people didn't care about the Bee Gees to the level of the Dead, but putting our own spin on it in a fun way. And I think, I think what might not translate fully if you just hear it, but when you see us up there, we're gonna have big smiles on our faces, and we're doing this for fun. Like, we're not doing it for the money. We're not doing it for we're not we're not doing it for notoriety. We're doing it because I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be fun to recreate these songs and perform them in a really fun way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, some people, like, there were some people who were like, "This sounds fucking terrible" on our Instagram and Facebook when we posted things, and I was just like, "Yeah, then don't come." Like, and there's people who take their Dead music so seriously, but Rip Roarin' Rob, our drummer, he said that someone posted on Facebook, like, how sick they were of people. This is such a great example of how the internet works. This woman had posted, like, "I'm so sick of everyone doing this money grab, just trying to play Grateful Dead songs. Like, people need to be playing original music. Original music's where it's at. Everyone just tries to want to get on a gravy train and not write their own songs." And then Rob said he clicked through to her profile, and her last post was her gushing over how much she had loved an Allman Brothers tribute band that she had seen the night before. And it's like, people just want to get angry about something, and there's no better way than ruffle some feathers than tell people you're playing great heavy metal versions of Grateful Dead songs. And if you think that's a bad idea, then, like, there's a million other bands you can see that night. And someone actually put a roundup together on Facebook yesterday that they tagged us in, and I followed the link to see, and it was all the different styles of Grateful Dead cover bands, and I had no idea there were that many of them. Like, there's Bertha from Nashville, who I've been hearing about, who's they play great traditional versions of the songs, but they're all drag queens. There was like a Mexican Grateful Dead cover band. There's a band that's mashing up Notorious B.I.G. songs with Grateful Dead songs. Like, I was like, man, that sounds
Brian
like
Lauer. Brian
notes.
Lauer, I think, is his name.
Who?
Brian Lauer or Lowry, I think is the guy's name who does the notorious big Grateful Dead mashup.
Yeah, that's to me that sounds interesting. Like, I love the idea of people taking something that's supposed to be one way and playing it in another way. And in a lot of ways, that's what hip hop became, right? Because people
Yeah.
were sampling drum beats from funk records and then adding different samples and guitar riffs and drum beats and bass lines and stuff. And like, sky's the limit for what people want to do with things like that.
Yeah.
And
I've,
I'd love to
I've
maybe
all,
put together some nights of like us and two other Grateful Dead bands. You know, let's let everybody play an hour, and not in any battle of the bands way, but like, hey, you want to hear, you want to hear mariachi versions of Dead songs, get there at 8 o'clock. You want to hear heavy metal versions, get there at 9:30. And if you want to, you want to hear hip hop BIG songs, get there at 11.
yeah. Yeah. I've always taken the comments because obviously doing this, I've gotten some comments, some messages from people telling me stuff, and I've tried to come up with a zen about it, saying there obviously something going on. They're sitting in their room, they're angry, they're screaming at their computer, and I try to have a little bit of maybe sympathy or kindness towards them in my head, and I found that's helped me discount what they say.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, I don't know. I won't say never, but I can't remember the last time I like left a negative comment on somebody's social media post, whether it's a person that I knew that existed or if it was an entity like a band or something. I mean, if I had to guess, it was probably a social media. Like, if I have done it, it would have been some big corporation that I felt like it ripped me off.
T-Mobile. The other day I tweeted T-Mobile because they were giving me a hard time.
Yeah, and that's more than fair game. But like, the idea that anyone would be on the internet like yelling about somebody else's band or something is kind of hilarious. And it brings me back to that old therapy quote, right? That hurt people hurt people. And it's like,
Right.
oh,
Yep.
do you want me to come over and cuddle you? You want me to bring you some chicken noodle soup? Are you having a bad day? Is that why you're saying that my Grateful Dead heavy metal band sucks ass, but you went to an Allman Brothers tribute band last night? Like, come on, man, let's hug it out. Like, maybe peace and love really is the answer.
Exactly. So what else do we have going on? You have the trucking gig coming up. You have the cruises, the on the boat there. What else do you have working now?
Jeez, how much more am I supposed to do, man?
I don't know, man. I didn't
I
know if
don't
you had like another band you were like on the side or something, you know.
Dude, not yet. No.
I got the trucking thing. I just told you I was rehearsing for 8 hours.
Yeah, I guess I do have another full-time job, actually. I work for the Bowery Presents in AEG, which is something I
Okay.
started a year ago, and I book shows. I booked the Starland Ballroom in New Jersey, which is a 2,000 capacity venue, and I contribute to the bookings of all of the Bowery venues in New York, which are Webster Hall, the Racket, Music Hall of Williamsburg, Brooklyn Steel, and Terminal 5. So yeah, so I have
So
that
there
full-time.
you go.
Rocks off as a full-time job, and now this band, which is another reason why I was like, why am I starting another band? Why am I starting another band at this age? When I started Tragedy, I was 34, and I was like, we'll go anywhere for $200. And we did. We played all sorts of shows for no money to get our name out there. And this time we're like, the whole idea, I said to the guys when we started, I was like, look, I don't know how much money we're ever going to make at this, and I don't know how many places we're going to go, but like, I'm not interested in like, I don't want to drive to Washington, D.C. for $200 at this point in my life. So I need you guys to be prepared. We might spend 6 months rehearsing this band, and we might only play 5 gigs a year in New York. And if that's it, that's it. And we like, I don't even know. It's going to take me a long time to recoup just the money I've spent on rehearsals. And then we're about to spend some more money on outfits, which is another thing. And I'm sort of been footing the bill for that because that's sort of my style. I'm not paying anybody to do these rehearsals or anything, but I said, I was like, none of you guys are going to have to come out of pocket to be in this band, but I also don't know when we're going to make any money. And everyone was like, that's cool. This song sounds fun. And that's what it's been. Like, there's been we did get offered a handful of gigs. Like I said, I think I said, we did get offered a handful of gigs 2 weeks ago. And I told everyone we're not even considering any gigs until we've played our first gig. And we just want to, we want to play good gigs that are a lot of fun for us to do. And then if money's involved too, that's going to be fucking great. But like, on the flip side, money has to be involved if we have to like fly somewhere or something. Like someone had offered us a gig in Nashville, and they asked how much money we needed, and I told them, and I think they were very surprised. But I said to them, We need 5 flights, 5 hotel rooms, and we need to rent backline like that.
Yeah.
That shit costs a lot of money, man. You know, when they
No.
were like, that's way out of our budget. And I was like, well, that's cool, man. If you ever have that kind of budget, you know.
All right. Or,
And like,
if so, for some reason you ever ended up doing a little mini tour, you know, it might try to cut it, but $200 coming from New York to DC doesn't even pay for your gas these days.
no, and it didn't even pay for our gas in, you know, 2007 and 2008. But so like we've all kind of been through that, where we've done the thing where we're like, if we just take this gig, then maybe the next one will be better, and the next one, and like you're trying to make it. And now we're like freed from any constraints about worrying about making it. You know, are we ever going to become Joe Russo's Almost Dead? Absolutely zero chance that happening. And that's fine. I'm so happy for those guys. I'm proud of those guys. But like, dude, if we made $5,000 to play a gig someday, I would be fucking dying laughing, because yeah, it would just be the coolest thing in the world to me.
I so miss the duo. I loved Russo and Marco when they used to do that duo thing.
Dude, that was great. That was great. In the short time I was booking the Knitting Factory full time, they had 3 rooms, and the tap bar was the room underneath the main space, not all the way in the basement, but they called it the tap bar because it had like 32 beers on tap. And for that one, I said to Russo, I was like, do you want to play every Thursday in the tap bar for $500 for the foreseeable future? And he was like, $500? Hell yeah. And he was like, what kind of band do I need to put together? And I was like, literally, I don't care, man. Like, you could play solo. I don't know who's going to come see you play solo, a drum solo for 3 hours every night, but I don't care. And he was like, I have this friend, Marco, that I went to high school with. He plays organ. What if I just called him? Like, would you give us $500, just the 2 of us? And I was like, yeah, I don't see why not. What does it matter to me if there's 2 of you or 5 of you, as long as it's a good show? And that's how the duo started.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I love that. All right, we're gonna give you $500. My first thought too would be, all right, how few people can I have?
Exactly. Joe's always had a good mind for business in that way.
That's so perfect.
It's
all right,
yet another reason why we'll never be J-Rad, right? Because Joe's very good at business, and I've managed to run a successful business, but I also I'm very fond of giving money to musicians. Like, that's sort of, you know, if you talk to most people in the concert biz that I've worked with, people will probably tell you that I give some of the most generous guarantees they've ever gotten. And when I lose money, I just go, yeah, but now you guys have it. That's fine. You know, they pay a band $5,000 and you only sell $3,000 worth of tickets. That's why I don't book bands that I don't like.
Right.
So if I happen to lose money on a show, I just go, yeah, well, what was I going to do with that money? It doesn't matter. Like, you know, if you guys get home from this tour and you guys each have an extra $1,000 in your pocket because I paid you too much, like, God bless you.
Yep. That's fantastic. So fantastic. All right. Why don't we well, actually, let me ask you one more question. You said we could go long. What do you think about the state of the industry? I mean, you're talking about trying to pay bands good. There's no more, I'm going to make enough money selling a record. You know, there's no more I can be a Steely Dan and only put out LPs, you know.
It's really tough, man. It's really interesting. Like, I have to put a different hat on when I work for Bowery Presents, because that's not my money. So they hired me and they pay me a nice salary to make sure that the shows that I book for them make money. And I've lost money on some of the shows I book for them because that's just the nature of doing shows. But it's fucking tough. Like, if you're a band who sells tickets, you can kind of write your own deal. Like, there's more venues than there are bands who can sell tickets at this point. So, like, you can, if you have a good agent and a good head on your shoulders, you can get paid very well if you can sell tickets. But if you're a band who's just starting, man, it is rough out there, because it costs a lot more to put gas in your car. It costs a lot more to stay at hotels. It costs a lot more to, you know, for tolls, for food while you're on the road, for printing up your merchandise. But it's like, if you are getting in this business and you want to start a band to make money, then you just don't, you know, like, it's got to be something you have to do. And like, when I started Tragedy, it was something I had to do. Like, not the first few gigs, but then once we did it and it was going well, I was like, I'll do anything. And everyone else in the band too. We were all like, wow, people love this. We're good at doing it. We're doing something no one's ever done before. We really enjoy it. So we will drive to DC for $200. And we did that for years. And like we never made a dime. Every time we'd get a halfway decent payday, we'd use that to buy our flights to UK for the next tour. And then we'd come home, we'd do like a 3-week tour in the UK, and then we'd pay ourselves out, and we'd each get like $600 for 3 weeks of work. And we were all taking time away from other the jobs and our families and stuff. But the state of the industry is such now that like it's harder and harder to get anybody's attention, right? It's harder to like you read about the statistics of how 30 or 40,000 songs get uploaded to streaming services every day or every week. It's just numbers that blow your mind. But yet I feel at the same time like there's a lot of people who are complaining like I don't make any money from my streaming. That's like, well, how many people listen to your song? You know what I mean?
Right.
Nicki Minaj makes plenty of money at streaming. I'm trying to defend the streaming companies, but like if you write and record your own song for probably next to nothing because you're going to do it on your iPad or your MacBook, and then you upload it to a streaming service. Like, why are people supposed to care? Like, how good are you at doing that? Like, you're going to be good. I'll tell you, Tragedy was an excellent band by our 300th gig. We were a fun band on our 30th gig, but like, you got to get out there and play and get experience. And I think a lot of the experience we've already put in will bear some fruit once we hit the stage in TRüKKEN. So we're not really starting from zero, but like if you're a young artist and you're 22 or 25 or 30 or whatever, and you're like, I want to make it as a musician, like chances are very slim, no matter how hard you work, that you're going to make it. But that's the same way it also was in 1978 and in 1971. So any career in the arts, like they sort of separate the wheat from the chaff just by like you have to work so hard and put in an insane amount of hours that like if you're not willing to do that, then you don't even deserve that next break. So like most people quit before that happens. I think now a lot of people get the internet gives them the opportunity to sort of like spread their word, but also spread their discontent, like and tell people like I should be more popular now because I've recorded 10 songs. It's like, did you 200 shows this year, or you're a young singer songwriter? Like you got to get out there and play, and you got to play.
I always in real estate, I did real estate for many years, and 4 out of 5 real estate agents fail within the first year is what the statistics says. And I was talking to the broker once about it, and I was like, I got a theory on this. I said the 4 people who fail in real estate every year sit around in the office complaining about how hard real estate is, while the other guy is out there busting his ass. He's the one who makes it through the year and is there the next year,
Right.
It's pretty simple. But another thing on Spotify, let me throw this out there. Spotify doesn't sell music. Spotify sells subscriptions. So they could care less what gets dumped out there, which dilutes the good stuff. It makes it that much harder to find the good stuff, Yeah.
Is it hard to find good stuff though? Like what I love about Spotify is the algorithm that makes playlists for me, and I discover a ton of new music that way. But that also takes a massive investment of time, because every time I spend 3 minutes listening to a new song I've never heard before, like oftentimes I don't like that song. And I think to a lot of people, it's easy to just put on a Grateful Dead song and put on, a show from Cornell in 77 and be like, I know I'm going to like this, or put on One by Metallica. But like you've got to invest in finding that new music too. Like Netflix and HBO, they sell their content, right? Like they're selling subscriptions, but they're really trying to get you to sign up by these shows that they're producing.
Right.
And a lot of that's crap too. A lot of art is subjective and a lot of it's hit or miss. And you have to work to find the stuff you like.
You got that right. Yep, definitely. All right, well, another thought, or one more thought. Back in the old days when you used to have to buy records, right? As opposed to being able to go and listen to, if 10 people release an album tomorrow, I can listen to all 10 of them. Back when we were kids, if 10 people released an album, you went and bought one album, and all of a sudden you were team AC/DC or team Judas Priest or whatever, because you had invested yourself in that band by spending your money,
Right. Yeah, you remember how bummed you would be when you'd buy that album and it wasn't good, and then you'd take it to the used record store and they're like, we'll give you 5% of what you paid for it.
Right. We don't want this crap. We got 10 of them in the back.
Yeah. But then you'd go to fucking Carol's house or Bobby's house if you had the AC/DC record and they had the Van Halen record, and then it encouraged a lot of sociability too. And then you'd tape them for each other.
Oh my God, the good old days. All right,
Yeah.
now that we've dated ourselves, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on. It was such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you.
Dude, my pleasure. I had a blast. I hope either me or the band gets down to Baltimore, and when I do, no matter how I get down there, I'll be giving you a shout. Maybe we'll go catch an O's game or something.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And for everybody watching, remember, like, subscribe, leave a comment if you're watching this later, and remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long. Hang out just a minute.